Hey everyone, welcome to another video. This is a hot take, East Coast versus West Coast. I got into a bit of an argument on Reddit, as usual, and turned into a discussion about basically East Coast versus West Coast. It was mostly about California, which is most of the West Coast. Oh, little Joan's here. Come on, little Joan. You coming up? Hello. And I, know a little bit about the subject because I lived on both coasts, basically. And I also did a comic on the Webcomic Factory, which you should check out, link in the description, called East Coast versus West Coast. And it was a fun comic that explored the cultures of the two coasts because they are very different. And, I had this guy or someone arguing about how great California was, basically. And really, it's fallen to pieces, it seems. Now, they got great weather. It's a big state, big economy. But because of that, I think the state itself has become too unwieldy. It's too big to run. It's just fallen to pieces because, well, first off, you have the fires. Now, I used to work for a guy who worked for the California department that was responsible for fire prevention. And I wrote scripts for him, basically telling people to clear their underbrush, which is a huge problem in California. People don't do it, and there's too much land that either, people own vast tracts of land that they don't upkeep the underbrush clearing, or it's owned by the government and there's not enough money to clear it. So that's mismanagement. There's no excuse for that because you can see the end result. There's a lot of fires. The government there, that needs to be a priority for them because it's much worse if they don't clear the underbrush. You're losing more money. It's the difference between, spending, $10 million a year clearing the underbrush or more, and losing hundreds of million with the fires. So there's that. And that's every year. I mean, it's not like it only happens once in a while. Every year there are fires. It's a big state, lots of trees, lots of forest. Part of the issue is they're a very green state. They don't want a lot of development. Okay, if you don't want a lot of development, you have to upkeep the non-development you have, or you have to expect tons and tons of fires. So then the next thing we were talking about, which is a huge issue to me, is San Francisco, one of the richest cities, if not the richest city in the United States. I don't know, I guess New York would probably edge them out. It's definitely up there. They have this problem with homeless people pooping on the streets. I mean, it's an actual problem. Yes, poop. The poop on the street is so bad, they've actually created the poop patrol to run around and pick up the poop, which is a ridiculous solution. They should not be, that's attacking the symptom and not the problem. And that's typical, I think, democratic thought process. Well, we'll just create a task force and that'll solve the problem. We'll just spend some more money to sort of ineffectually attack the problem. And I think the reason they do that is because it's a virtue signal, right? You can see the poop patrol picking up the poop on the street rather than solving the problem, and then you'd be a normal city where that wouldn't even be an issue. I don't think it's a conscious decision. I think it's more of a subconscious decision of poop patrol, that'll work. People will see it and we'll look like we're doing something. What they really need to do, especially in San Francisco, is they need to allow people to build housing that is lower income. And it's amazing to me that You know, California, San Francisco in particular, they're the home of all these liberals who claim to be, you know, for the poor and want to help the poor. Oh, but they don't want the architecture in their neighborhoods to suffer. Oh, and they don't want the poor to live near them. That's hypocrisy on a massive scale. There's absolutely no reason that any of these big companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook couldn't, you know, start a big giant, shelter for the homeless. There's absolutely no reason they can't do that. They're too busy trying to game the election online or gaming the algorithm to line their own pockets. It shows you that they don't really care, about these liberal views. They're not really liberal. They're all about money. What they're doing is about money. It's not about, helping anybody. They don't care about helping anybody. And that is a perfect example, because the few millions, and it would be few to them, that they could spend housing people would greatly benefit the people in the general vicinity of these places where the poop patrol has to go in San Francisco. And that's Nancy Pelosi's district, which is another piece of irony. I mean, here's a woman who's been in Congress forever. You would think people who lived in San Francisco would be just disgusted by the mayoral administration and even her. Why isn't something done? It's been years. It's a huge problem. It's killing the tourism in San Francisco. They've had big trade shows pull out, and it's just gross. I mean, it's all online. You could go online and see the ridiculous poop patrol, articles. You could see the app that they created to report these incidents. Another big giant waste of money. All they really need to do is start tackling the homeless problem by building some low-income housing so these people could live and have a place to poop and do whatever, take their drugs. That's another issue. As a libertarian, I'm all about the legalization of drugs, but just enabling people and then cutting them loose on the street is not the same thing. You need to give these people some place to go. It's dangerous to have addicts living in the streets with their needles. There are little kids walking around the street. Anyone could step on a needle, and they're addicts. They're not together. They're not going to shoot up, sit in a corner, and then go their merry way. They're going to shoot up, wander around the street, lose half their stuff, go bananas, lose needles. I mean, at least if they had a place to live, they might have a shot at getting together. There are functional addicts. They can function enough that they can work, build a life, and then hopefully maybe get off the drugs slowly over a period of time. Or if they never get off, they can at least manage their addiction to the point where they're not, escalating to the point where they're just going to OD and die. I'm going to put down Little Joan. We don't have this homeless problem in the rest of the country. California has, at least on one website I was reading, over 100,000, I think it was 120,000 homeless statewide. New York has 90, and the rest of the country by state, none of them have over 30. So that shows you the issue there. Now, some of the states are smaller, they have fewer people, but I live in New Jersey, one of the most densely populated states in America, and we just don't have that big of a problem. We have homeless people. We have, I think it was a few thousand, but it's not epidemic. There are programs, there are low-income housing. Hell, there are abandoned buildings. That's something. You can't run a city like San Francisco to the point at which you micromanage everything. You have to give some leeway so people could, for instance, live in an abandoned house, or maybe skirt the laws a little bit so they could do things. And that's going to cause other problems, but those other problems are minuscule compared to having feces in the street where officials are worried about a cholera outbreak. That's like third world. When you're talking about cholera outbreak, that is very third world. LA has a similar problem. They have tons of homeless, and they have piles and piles of trash. They have a rat population that is exploding. They've had typhus return. These are medieval diseases. This should not happen in the United States, and this is not happening anywhere else in the country. It's not happening in Houston. It's not happening in, New York. Now, granted, New York, colder climate, different issues. But it's not happening in Miami. Miami's nice and warm. So something has to be done. And clearly, I think part of the issue is the mentality of the state and the mentality of the Democrats. The fact that the Democrats completely control the California legislature and they can't solve these problems. I mean, they have carte blanche to do whatever they want, right? They could, give homeless people money. They could build a skyscraper to them, whatever they want to do, and they're not doing it. Or whatever they're doing isn't working. And it's just attracting more homeless people to the state. So it tells you that they have to do something else. They have to adopt a different strategy. But part of the problem is they're so busy virtue signaling to their voters who still believe that kind of stuff can be done through progressivism, that they won't change their strategy. And that means you have to go to the voters and say, hey, this doesn't work. We have to do something different. And if you don't, you're just going to keep going until you literally drive most of the voters out of state or out of your party. That process has already started. People are leaving California in droves. The taxes are too high, and there's too many of these, horrible problems. That's not happening on the East Coast, People on the East Coast, and this goes to the culture. On the East Coast, there is a certain realness. People will tell you to your face what they think of you. They're not rude, but, if push comes to shove, they will tell you the truth. In California, everybody's polite, but nobody means it. It's really true. I mean, I've had people from California who I've met, and I meet LA people, and they'll invite me to their house, and they invite me out to dinner, but it's not a real invite. If you were actually take these people up, they look at you. I experienced it firsthand. I went to Los Angeles, and we met these guys, and they invited us out for Thanksgiving dinner. And, we were at a party, and they were like, oh, you got to come. And I was like, well, I don't know. It's Thanksgiving. Aren't you with your family? No. You got to come. I mean, he was super insistent. Finally, I went, okay, I'm there. And me and my roommates were like, yeah, we'll come. So Thanksgiving rolled around, and we drove way out to this guy's house. And I swear to you, he answered the door, and he was like, oh. Like, surprised we show up. And he was not ready for guests. He was clearly not ready for guests. And we spent Thanksgiving around his pool, and we had some food, and I was like, why the F did we come here? Why the hell did we come all the way out here? This guy clearly didn't want us here. He just wanted to be a virtue signaler. I wish I had known that term back then. He was such a virtue signaler. And this happened all the time in LA. This happens all the time with people in California. They love to invite, oh, you want a beverage? Sure. Oh, well, I might have something. It's like, don't offer me a beverage if you don't want to give me a beverage. It's like when you go to meet someone in California, you agree to go, meet me at the store. That's not a definite thing. On the East Coast, that's a definite thing. If you tell me to meet you somewhere and you're not there, you better have a good explanation. In California, it's totally optional, dude. Totally optional. Happened to me several times. Go to this place. Where were you? Oh, I didn't go. It's totally optional. It's a different culture. And I think that's part of why this legislature is the way it is. They don't really mean what they say, and that's part of the culture. They're perfectly fine. It's perfectly acceptable in California culture to virtue signal all day and do nothing. Because the important thing to them is their image, is my theory. So as long as they talk a good game about helping the homeless, actually helping the homeless doesn't really matter. And that's at the crux of most of the problems in California, the homeless issue. And trying to solve everybody's problems through government. You can't. You know, it was much better when California had, you know, they have open desert areas where homeless people can go out and live, and they lived in like old buses and shacks or whatever. There's nothing wrong with having those places out in the middle of nowhere. Yes, crazy stuff's going to happen. There's going to be crime and drugs out there. It's going to be terrible for those homeless people. But it's always terrible for homeless people. It doesn't matter if you give them money or not. It sucks to be homeless. You can have them, you know. The only thing that doesn't suck is having a home. That's the only difference. As long as you're homeless, it doesn't matter that you get all these benefits. You're still living on the street. So you have to solve the crisis by building houses and giving up your elite, you know, status of protecting architecture or protecting neighborhoods or whatever. Everybody's got to suck it up and have a few poor people in their neighborhood. That's what we do in the rest of the country. So suck it up, California, because you're really starting to suck. And East Coast is way better. I've always said it. I've lived here. I'm totally biased. But in East Coast versus West Coast, East Coast always wins.